The accusation here is of misleading information that has been provided by Karpowerships to the South African government. What is this information?
Okay, so in June 2020, when we were in the middle of the height of the COVID crisis, although we're getting another wave now, but Karpowerships' parent, Karadinis, applied to the National Department of Fisheries and Environment for an emergency permit allowing them to bring ships into South African ports without going through the normal environmental checks and balances, the normal EIA process. And they claimed to the department, to a senior official in the department, that they were wanting to supply power because of the COVID crisis, because of blackouts that were, affecting hospitals, etc. In August of 2020, the day after the Department of Mineral and Energy announced the opening of bids for this emergency power supply that Karpower has now become a preferred bidder for. The day after those bids were announced, the Department of Fisheries and Environment withdrew the emergency permission that they had given. And they've undertaken an investigation, and they're looking into whether that emergency permission, which allowed Karpower to avoid going through EIA process, whether that was based on misleading information provided, that they didn't have a deal with Eskom, they were not ready to provide emergency power, and that could affect the current bid for this huge Eskom contract.
Let's talk about the previous times that Karpowerships has attempted at least to get some kind of deal with government with supplying power. It seems the history of the relationship is that it has always been on an emergency basis, despite the fact that the attempt started, at least as your story tracks it, Sam, since 2015.
Yes, in 2015, again, when we had load shedding, we got a copy of a letter that we obtained from the then chairperson of Eskom to the then Minister of Energy, suggesting that Karpower be one of the entities that could provide emergency power to solve the load shedding problem in 2015. Again, it was suggested that they bypass the kind of normal procurement processes. That didn't happen. Eskom said they should talk to the Independent Power Producing Office to apply in the normal course, so that didn't happen. But they tried again in 2018 during elections, again saying, load shedding might affect the election process. And as we discussed, they tried in 2020 with the COVID, using the COVID emergency as a way to argue that there should be a shortcut taken with the normal process of awarding licenses.
Kevin Mileham, what does the DA make of all this?
Well, Sam is on the money here, and really the issue is that every time this particular entity tries to get involved in South Africa's electricity crisis, there seems to be shortcuts involved. So we've been asking, in particular, with regard to the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producers Procurement Program, the so-called emergency procurement. We've been asking for some time now. Let's see the scoring. Let's see the deliberations of the Bid Adjudication Committee. Let's see who was involved and what they said about the various elements, various bidders of the emergency power procurement process. And when we put that to the committee, we asked for an investigation. When we put it to the committee of the Portfolio Committee of Mineral Resources and Energy, we asked for an investigation into the bid process, the adjudication, the scoring, the deliberations, and it was rejected out of hand. And the comment made was quite bizarre. What one of the ANC members of the committee said is that oh no, this is a financial matter and it falls outside the mandate of this committee and it should be dealt with by SCOPA. Now, that's a blatant untruth. It's squarely within the mandate of the Portfolio Committee of Mineral Resources and Energy to investigate such incidents, to investigate the process, to ensure that it is above board. And so we need to look at all the elements. It appears that Karpowerships, first of all, has taken shortcuts on the environmental permits, as Sam has said, but also on obtaining the necessary land use permits from Transnet Port Authority. They don't have the permissions in place from Transnet, which was and is a legal requirement. It appears unlikely that they will be able to obtain these by the time of financial close, which is the end of July. So there are a number of question marks over this particular company's ability to deliver on the requirements of the RFP, and yet the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy appears to bend over backwards to accommodate them, something they're not prepared to do for any of the other bidders. It's not something that we think is or needs to be exclusively targeted at Karpowerships. We want to look at the whole process and look at all the bids and make sure that it is all above board. But the allegations point directly to Karpowerships.
Of course, the suggestion there that you're making, Kevin, is that Karpowerships is receiving preferential treatment from government, and there should be a reason why, if that is indeed the case. Do you have any ideas for why?
Well, I think the thing that you have to look at is who's involved. Who are the people behind the company? And in this particular case, one of the shareholders is a Mr. Thabo Mokoena. Now, he was the special advisor to former Minister of State Security, Bongani Bongo. And so he's very close to high-ranking members of the ANC. You have to wonder, well, is this something that has been set up to channel funding towards the ANC or towards connected cadres? We saw in Medupi and Kusile how Chancellor House invested in Hitachi Power Systems, and we know the outcome of that process. So we just are suspicious at this stage. We don't have any evidence. It's mere suspicions, but this is why we have to investigate and get it all out in the open and make sure that it is dealt with absolute transparency, that everything is above board. If it's not, then we must disqualify whoever is found to be wanting, whether that's from a permit perspective or from a misleading information perspective or from a manipulation of the process perspective.
Sam, what has been the response, at least that you have received, when engaging with the representatives of Karpowerships?
Look, they didn't want to engage with. We sent them, more than 40 questions about environmental issues. They sent a very brief response saying they were confident that they had met and would meet all the processes. But I think we have to take a step back. Although there are a lot of question marks about Karpowership and how they've got around some of the provisions of and had exemptions to some of the provisions of the bid process, I think there are question marks about how this whole tender was set up. That Karpowership may be, pure as the driven snow, but I think there are still serious questions about the structure of the tender, because the way in which it's set up, the requirements for each generating site really don't make sense, except for a short-term emergency requirement. If this tender had been set up for 3 to 5 years, then one could understand the short-term dispatch requirements. The bidders are required to provide really emergency power at a few minutes' notice to Eskom, more or less at the highest level for which they've contracted for about 16 and a half hours per day. And they have to do that at each site. Now, that kind of structure is for short-term crisis that we're in. So it would have made sense to have a bid like that which obviously advantages things like gas, which Karpowership runs on, as opposed to renewables and so on. The fact that they've entered into such a contract structured like this for 20 years makes absolutely no sense. When you're balancing renewables and gas and the capacity of your generating fleet, you do that at a system level. You don't do that at individual power station level, which is the way this contract has been set up. It makes no logical sense. So we have to ask, what's the real reason behind this? Is there a whole gas play that is behind this, and somebody wants to have an anchor client for Mozambican gas, for Brulpadda, or for other gas interests that politicians or their business mandarins have invested in for the next 20 years.
All
because
right.
The way it's set up makes no sense.
So certainly still lots of questions around this particular deal. Sam Soul, he is with the amaBhungane Center for Investigative Journalism, and Kevin Mileham with the Democratic Alliance. Thanks for coming onto the show today, and at least painting a picture of their own questions and concerns where this deal is concerned.